Up next, we have two gentlemen that are going to present on key accounts. Less is more.
So Rob Macdonald, Ben Salisbury. We were introduced by Christian at Equinox, which is a technology implementer and trainer for GreatVines, if you don't know Christian. And we've been working together for, well, just about a year now. And so Art Farm, and Rob can talk about his brand and what he's doing, but they are a GreatVines customer for about a year now. And from the early days, it was important to Rob to use the feature in GreatVines that would allow you to target accounts for certain things. And their brand is not your traditional wine brand. How many of you have heard of St. Mayhem or have seen St. Mayhem in the market?
Wow, there's 3. We must be doing something right.
How would you describe St. Mayhem as a brand?
It's a wine cooler with a twist. A few years ago, I decided to throw jalapeno and habanero peppers in my wine and see what would happen. And I see a few scrunched up faces, which is a response that I often get. But it turns out it actually tastes really good. But you got to taste it to see that. It's very hard for a lot of people to imagine. And I also realized, having been through this type of thing before, when I first started in the industry over here, I was importing Australian wine, and this was back in the early 90s, and I was quite often faced with people looking at me, incredulously going, "They make wine in Australia?" And so I had to, I've sort of been through this process before, and unfortunately didn't have the tools to record and capture the whole, the sales process and the learning process. So this time around, we went hunting for something that we could find to both track down the customers that we wanted to talk to and also keep track of them. And so hence we ended up with GreatVines. And then I very quickly realized that from this point, once we'd identified GreatVines, that we then needed to make sure that we hired people that would actually use it. And that's when I was introduced to Ben, and the principal role of working with Ben was to activate GreatVines with the people that we were hiring. And someone said before, it takes 12 months to get people to use it properly. I can vouch for that. It's implementation has been fun. Anyway.
Rob's being modest because they have amazing adoption at this point. I think it's a fairly flat organization. It's Rob and then a national sales manager and then the sales team. But once people get the idea that this is what's expected, the mantra, if it's not in GreatVines, it doesn't exist, is absolutely true, and it's not. And once people do it, it becomes a habit, and then they see that you're inspecting it. At the very end, we'll show you a snapshot of the sales calls that his 3-person team has made in just 1 week's time. It's pretty inspiring. So when we started working together, we had an agenda of accomplishing several things. First of all, my team we like to consider ourselves power users of GreatVines. We know our way in and out of the tool. We've helped many different clients make the most of it. So I was really excited to join up with Rob and his team. Long before we had a sales force, and one of the things we did was help recruit the sales force, we started researching the types of accounts we wanted to be in. And I really think it's an exciting case study, if you will, of the value of key account targeting. I know this is going to sound like, I don't know, it's not everybody fits, it doesn't all fit into your head exactly the same way when I say this, but not all accounts are equal, not even close to being equal. No matter how you slice it, business is concentrated into a very small number of accounts. In our industry, we love to use pods and accounts sold as our key metrics, and these are okay metrics, but with the technology of GreatVines, you can be far more specific than that. And so let me jump into a couple of key slide. So our job today is to make a business case for key account targeting, and then spend the majority of the rest of the time talking about the real world case. How does Art Farm use it in their GreatVines org? So these are, if you know me or you've heard my pitch before, these are the things I talk about incessantly. Not all accounts are equal. Less is more. Most of you have heard of the 80-20 rule, right? How many have heard of the 80-20-30 rule, besides Kara? The 80-20-30 rule says that if you spend any time at all in the bottom 30% of the account base, you're guaranteed to cut your potential in half. And I'll illustrate that in a second. And really, this is very counterintuitive, but to accelerate sales, if you want to go from single-digit or double-digit growth to 30 and 40% growth, you're going to have to ignore most customers. You're going to have to narrow the focus of your activity to only the most attractive and responsive accounts. And I wish we had more than half an hour because I would love to dive into that with you. But here's my last point. The cost of confusing activity with achievement is astronomical, and unfortunately, our industry is addicted to activity. You know, I've run sales teams for many, many years, and I used to say that I can tell when there's not enough work getting done because my salespeople are complaining how exhausted they are and how hard they're working. I knew better that activity doesn't mean achievement. I want to see what you've actually accomplished. So somebody mentioned this in the previous session, the key to communication and being aligned. We talk every Wednesday at 11 o'clock Central, which is what, 9 o'clock your time? Every Wednesday for a year. So we're coming up on like our 52nd weekly call. And so there's great benefits to having frequent check-ins. So I did this survey of, I was called out to Philadelphia in July to do a sales training for a very large distributor who I don't think is in the room. And I was addressing both my ex-employer, Constellation Brands, and the entire sales team for Southern Wine & Spirits. And I sent a survey out before I went to do the training, and this was one of the slides. I said, the 80-20 rule, fact or fiction, is it just a fancy theory or is it true? 2/3 of the people said, it's mostly true, but not always true. And then it was an entrapment. I guess the police call that entrapment. I trapped them and then showed them how they were absolutely wrong. That the 80-20 rule is right every single time, every market, every sector of the business, beer, wine, spirits, doesn't matter what the state is, what the market is, it's always true. And then I showed them this slide where I had analyzed 8,000 accounts in Pennsylvania and put them on a graph to prove that the 80-20 rule is absolutely true. When you analyze the account potential in any market, the graph always looks like this. It's always shaped like this. I defy anyone to see something different. And when you're working with 8,450 accounts, it's a pretty reliable thing. And so this is the money slide. This is my favorite slide. This comes right out of a textbook from the Kellogg School of Business at Northwestern. Halfway through my career at St. Michel Wine Estates, I was stuck. We had a lot of success over a 5-6 year period of time, and I couldn't get the sales to go any faster. So I started casting about for help. And one of the helps I found was this textbook called The Complete Guide to Accelerating Salesforce Performance. The title alone had me at hello. And this was the best slide in the whole book. Every single market of every consumer product looks like this. The vast majority of the potential is concentrated in the top third of the account base. And conversely, in the other end of the spectrum, the potential goes down. But the average salesperson, and those of you in the room who are sales leaders know this intuitively, the average salesperson tends to spread their effort in a very democratized way across the account base. And identifying the right accounts isn't the hard part. The hard part is getting the salespeople to stay on the left side of this chart. And so this illustrates the 80-20-30 rule. Why do so many people spend their time over the right side of the chart? It's easier. There's not as many people trying to sell over there. On the left side of the chart, it's very, very hard. Everyone wants to be in these accounts. But to the degree you can direct your sales force to stay on the left side, you will prosper mightily. And all this to say is without a tool like GreatVines, I don't know how you do it. You can't do this in Excel. But GreatVines opens up this amazing world for you where you identify the accounts that are on the left side of that chart, and then you track all activity and achievement against them. Beautiful thing, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Kara gave me this quote, and I love it, and it's a good segue to what St. Mayhem is doing. Those who are recognizing the importance of getting the right products in the right stores to meet the needs of shoppers in that store will be the winners. And after this, I'm going to be mostly quiet to let Rob talk. But there's two basic objectives of key account targeting. One is volume. In the wine business, at least, we don't have a lot of control over ramping up volume and tapering off volume on it takes 4 or 5 years to make those kind of changes, right? It's a little bit easier in spirits and beer. But volume is a key driver of the wine business, and it will always be that way because there's more grapes growing, and they're coming in the fall. And if you haven't moved through all of your inventory, you got a big problem. Grapes are heavy, they take up a lot of space, and inventory is the most expensive asset of any winery. So when we do key account targeting, we look where can we find the most volume with the least amount of effort. And we don't have time to get into the methodology today. I'm happy to share that with you. I'll be here all day. We can talk at the break. But foot traffic is the most reliable indicator of volume. Where there are more people, there's more consumption. But where we spent most of our effort with St. Mayhem is in getting the right wines in the right places. A good fit for this brand. And even more important is the brand or the account gets us. And maybe you can talk a little bit about, from the very first get-go, when you launched St. Mayhem, you had things in mind about the types of account and the types of buyers, right?
Yeah, when it took 3 years from the point where I threw peppers in the wine to see what would happen to the point where we actually had a product in a package that we could sell. So over the 3-year period, I was looking at this going, I had a clear idea of who my customer was, but I really didn't have any idea at all because I hadn't been able to show it to anybody. So the inspiration from all this came from craft beer, and I thought that my customer was going to be the craft beer customer, the people, I'm 53 years old, and so the people younger than me, the craft beer generation, the people that are dialed into flavour, the people that want experiment. I grew up on meat and potatoes, and the craft beer generation's grown up on astounding ranges of flavours, both in food or coffee or soft drinks or beer or whatever it is. There's been a massive shift. So I figured that's where our customer base was. And so I went out and started presenting St. Mayhem to people in the market. We got into Whole Foods down in Southern California pretty quick, and that gave me the opportunity to stand and pour the stuff for people for hours on end, days after days, doing in-store demos. And I also spent a lot of time going from store to store. So I was able to create a profile of what the customer looked like. And the age was actually less important. The profile ended up being, one of the, there were some silly things and some more complicated things. But, one of the first drivers we realised was that anyone who liked to cook was actually a potentially good customer. The reason for that is that, my apologies to the somms in the crowd, I'm not trying to beat up on somms, but when we look at the way we learn about wine, a lot of it is negative based. It's what we're always looking for, what's not there, what's wrong with it. It's a backwards based evaluation system. Whereas if you're a chef, you're looking at it from the ground up. You're looking at, what can I put together to make this better, or how can it be more? Or it's a growing, living thing. And so the simple question of, do you like to cook, is one of the most important things that we could ask a customer, and it's on the top of our list, and it's proven to be a great identifier.
And we track it in GreatVines.
We have a box in GreatVines. You don't have to be a chef. You don't have to be trained. You just have to like to cook. Another one is body modifications. Might sound silly, but tattoos, piercings, not
beards,
not the traditional lady with the pierced ear, but other piercings, facial hair, all this sort of stuff, it just ended up being identifiers of our potential customer. And it sort of brings into, we're talking about key account targeting, but it's also key contact targeting, which I think is as important as the key account piece, because they quite often in an account, the trigger for success in that account is the relationship with the key contact. And so finding those people that are complementary to our business is in some ways more important. They'll move to another key account at some point in their career, and we've still got them as a contact. And that's always been certainly one of my big challenges in the past, is keeping up with people. And now we have a means to do that.
Well, let's just talk briefly about the process. This is a little window into how we wrote down what it was we were looking for. And of course, as Rob said, the people who worked there were a big clue as to whether or not this was going to be a good St. Mayhem account. If we're scrolling through dozens and dozens of Instagram feed photos, and all the people who work there are tatted up and are young, and there's, they look like our peeps, right? Then that's a good indication. So we started with words. What are the words we want to look for? And this helps with the screen scraping and the research of trying to identify the accounts that would be a good fit. And also a list of things we don't want. And again, nothing against Master Somms and the people who are gifted to pursue that, but those aren't the people for St. Mayhem. So if there was an air of elitism or of curating a really great wine menu, that's probably not a good fit. So and we're going to show you a couple of examples of people that might be the quintessential St. Mayhem customer. But the search for the right account started with these attributes, and all of these attributes are recorded in GreatVines, including the picture. Maybe you could talk a little bit about why it's so important to have a picture of every contact in the database.
So you know what they look like?
Yes, thank you, Rob. Next. No, but you can tell a lot about a person by looking at them, right? You can tell their age, right? You can tell kind of what their personal interests are. There's a lot you can tell. Yeah.
No, the picture is important. More so from the point of view of I like the idea of being able to identify people quickly ahead of time. If I walk into an account and one of the sales guys have been in there, I want to be able to say, hey, Joe, whoever. But it's again, it comes back to knowing your customer and why key account targeting is so important, because it gives you an opportunity to get to know your customer without standing in front of them. I used an example with one of the reps the other day, and it seemed to sink in, I think. When the reason that you sell wine well in an account is because you get to know that account or that person. And if you meet someone at a party, you have a chance to have a bit of a chit-chat and get to know them and all so on and so on. And the relationship evolves over a period of time. But when we're selling to people, we don't have that luxury. Trying to get one-on-one time or chit-chat time with people is really tough. And what key account targeting lets us do is get to know the customer before we go in there, so that we've got a run-up on the relationship, and it's not a standing start. And the photo is part of that. It's just an integral part of getting to know that person.
We have a couple of examples are accounts that fit the criteria and were therefore designated inside GreatVines as a key account target with a simple checkbox. But then lots of other attributes too. Do they carry cans? Do they have wine on tap? What do we know about the buyers? Do they consider themselves a chef? Do they have body mods? We even have fields where we try to estimate what their age is and then we have a picture. So there's this.
See, put my tuk-tuk in there.
Yeah. Well, I took some of these pictures out, but they didn't take.
No, that's right.
So this is probably a great example. BlackBeard's Crafts in LA. Anybody been to BlackBeard's Crafts in LA? It's almost an extreme example of the quintessential St. Mayhem customer, and they're constantly looking for new things, pushing the envelope with flavors and whatnot. Rayback Collective in Boulder has been a great account. Very outdoorsy people in Boulder, of course, and young people, music scene, very active on the go. So we have, I guess, over 400, 500 of these accounts identified in the GreatVines org. And right before we go to questions, because I'm sure there's some questions, that was a fast session. Because these are all designated and the fields are in GreatVines, you can report against them. So you can get all kind of great information. Is my sales force calling on these key accounts that we've worked so hard to identify? Are they building relationships there? This is a typical week in the life of a couple of salespeople making sales calls in GreatVines. These guys do an amazing job. They've logged over 2,000. So 2 salespeople, a national sales manager, and Rob does a bit of selling, have logged over 2,000 sales calls in the last year. Just a tiny little sales team. But great things to come. Okay, so we should open it up to questions.
First of all, it's a great story and a great brand, and I love what you guys are doing to really profile and focus on the right buyers and the right accounts. But I had a quick question, and you say 400 of these accounts. Are you relying on your reps to go into these markets and bring those accounts to you? Or are you doing it through data? You mentioned scrolling through Instagram photos.
We actively identify the accounts before we go into the market. So we're currently prepping New York and New Jersey, and Ben's team has been scrolling through all the online resources. And in fact, sometimes actually calling accounts to gather information. It's really quite funny, but we've become so reliant on online stuff that people forget that they can just call the account and say, "Hey, do you do tastings?" But no, it's so there's always a list before we go into the market. There's and then we modify it. It's a living thing. It gets updated in theory on a weekly basis by input from the sales reps and us.
Well, one quick follow-up to that, and some of the distributors might appreciate this, but Art Farm is not in every state in the U.S., but is getting there. So as new markets open up and they have their initial meetings with the distributor, we've already got the target account list of the places we want to be in for that state. So it's really an impactful thing to be able to walk in and lead with that. Mike, did you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question. I'm Michael Bender with the Old Smoky Distillery out of Tennessee. So I live your pain every day, brother, being the moonshine guy in a bourbon world. But just a little bit with some jalapenos in some of the stuff we do as well. But my question was really for you around market segmentation, because I live and die by the 80-20 rule. So 2 things is, one, I don't really understand what the 30 is, so maybe I just wasn't listening well enough. And then secondarily, what's your opinion on market segmentation within a big state like Ohio, where you've got one sales rep that basically has responsibility for that state? But if you just look at foot traffic in accounts, then all of a sudden all your key accounts are in Cincinnati. But you've got some high volume accounts in places like Akron or Dayton or Columbus. So do you just focus your energies on the top 20% that are all in Cincinnati, or do you segment that state into smaller pieces?
Well, that's a big question, because if you believe that the way to sell a product is to walk in cold with no relationship and make a great pitch and walk out with an order, then you might as well target the whole state, right? Because it's just a function of how many sales calls can you fit in. But the fact is, you can't build placements that stick that way. So you have to take advantage of the limited amount of time. If you have a limited amount of time, which everyone does, and a limited number of salespeople, which sounds like you do, you have to prioritize. The more you try to cover a larger geography, the less effective you'll be. And this is what the 80-20-30 rule is all about. If your people are playing around over there on the right side of this graph, they're busy and they're making placements, but you're not achieving your goals. You've got to stay focused where the fish are. You got to fish where the fish are. It takes a lot of discipline to do that, and most people struggle with it.
How have you applied the 80-20 rule to your distributors? Because they all have their own 80-20 rule and their own incentives and their own suppliers that they need to report to as well.
It comes down to a conversation in the appointment process, or if it's an existing distributor that we're introducing the brand to, it comes down to a conversation with them ahead of time, and much like you would with a salesperson, you explain to them why and show them the value in it, and then if there's a good partnership there, they'll get it, and they'll realise that they'll have the best results if they focus on those accounts.
I would also add to this, and I hope there's no projectiles headed to the stage, but the days of picking a distributor and expecting them to make placements for you, those are long gone. Unless you have your own people in the market, you probably have no business being in that state. But I work by myself, so I can say whatever I want.
And he's old enough to say whatever he wants now too.
Any other
Transparency.
questions from the audience?
That's not a knock on distributors. Distributors doing the best they can. It's quite amazing what they get done. You will always need them. But for a supplier to believe that the distributor is going to do all this for them, it's just not realistic in 2017.
Well, Rob and Ben, thank you very much. It was a great presentation. We're going to do a 15-minute break, and we'll meet back here in a little bit.